He woke up before the alarm most days, not because he was rested, but because his mind never really slept. The small apartment was quiet, except for the low hum of the fridge and the soft breathing of his daughter in the next room. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, already counting what the day would cost him. Gas, rent, food, school supplies. Every dollar had a job before it even reached his hands. He rolled out of bed carefully, trying not to make the floor creak. The place was modest but clean. He kept it that way out of habit and pride. Toys were lined up against the wall, shoes placed neatly by the door. He had learned that order helped when everything else felt out of control out in the kitchen. He poured cheap coffee into a chipped mug and drank it slowly. It tasted burnt, but it did its job. As he stood there, he checked his phone. No new messages. No missed calls. That was normal. Most people didn't have time to check on a struggling single dad who barely had time to check on himself. His daughter came out rubbing her eyes, hair messy, wearing pajamas that were a little too small. She smiled when she saw him, and that smile alone made the weight on his chest ease just a little. He smiled back, even though his body already felt tired. He helped her get ready, made her breakfast, and listened to her talk about school like it was the most important thing in the world. To her, it was. While she ate, he packed her bag and checked the calendar on the fridge. Rent was due soon. He stared at the date longer than he should have. He had done the math again and again. It barely worked, but somehow it always did. Somehow, after walking her to school, he went straight to his day job. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even something he liked. But it paid enough to keep the lights on. He worked quietly, rarely complaining, rarely asking for help. People knew him as dependable. They didn't know how much it cost him to be that way. During lunch, while others scrolled through their phones or joked around, he sat alone and ran numbers in his head. His evening job delivering pizza had become a lifeline. Without it, there would be no room for emergencies, no room for mistakes. He hated being gone at night, hated missing bedtime stories, but he told himself it was temporary. He had been telling himself that for years. By the time his day shift ended, his legs already ached. Still, he didn't go home to rest. He picked up his daughter, helped her with homework, cooked dinner, and listened as she told him about her day again, this time with more detail. He nodded, asked questions, laughed when she laughed. He made sure she felt heard. He made sure she felt safe. When it was time to leave for his second job, she hugged him tightly. "Be careful," she said, like she always did. He promised her he would be. He always did, even though he knew promises didn't protect anyone from the real world. The pizza place was loud and busy, filled with the smell of grease and melted cheese. He tied on his apron, checked his car keys, and signed in for deliveries. His car wasn't new, but it ran well enough. He took care of it like it was another responsibility, because it was. Without it, everything would fall apart. As the night went on, orders came in fast. He drove through neighborhoods that looked nothing like his own. Big houses, bright lights, families gathered around dinner tables. He didn't envy them, not exactly, but sometimes he wondered what life might have been like if things had gone differently. He used to dream too. He used to think about the future in ways that didn't involve survival. Back then, he believed hard work would always lead to something better. Now, he wasn't so sure. Still, he kept going. He had no other choice. Between deliveries. He checked his phone again. No messages. He didn't expect any. The people he once leaned on had slowly drifted away. Life had pulled them in different directions. He didn't blame them. Everyone had their own struggles. He focused on the road, on the addresses, on the clock ticking toward midnight. Each delivery was another chance at a tip, another small step toward stability. Some customers were kind. Some barely looked at him. He treated them all the same. Polite, quick, professional. By the end of the night, his shoulders felt heavy, like they were carrying more than just fatigue. He thought about his daughter asleep at home, about the bills waiting on the counter, about the future he hoped he was building for her. He told himself that one day she would understand why he worked so hard. One day it would all make sense. He didn't know then that his life was closer to changing than he could imagine. To him, it was just another long day, another night of deliveries. Just another effort to hold everything together with tired hands in the quiet hope. And so he drove on, unaware that one ordinary shift, taken out of pure necessity, was about to lead him to a moment that would test his strength in a completely different. The rain started quietly at first, soft drops tapping against the windshield, almost soothing. He barely noticed it, focused on the next delivery. But within an hour, the gentle drizzle turned into a full-blown storm. Rain hammered down, blurring the streetlights, turning familiar roads into rivers of water. The wind howled against the car, and he had to grip the steering wheel tightly, eyes squinting against the sheets of rain. It was the kind of storm that made even the shortest drive feel dangerous. Traffic slowed to a crawl. Headlights cut through the dark, misty streets, but visibility was poor. He kept his car on the edge of the lane, careful, alert, every sense on high. Some drivers were too fast, weaving dangerously, while others barely moved. He took deep breaths, trying not to let fear take over, reminding himself that he had done this before. He had to. There was no choice. Every tip counted. Every delivery mattered. The phone buzzed. Another order came in, urgent and nearby. He glanced at the address and hesitated. Normally, he wouldn't think twice, but tonight was different. The roads were slick, and the storm showed no sign of letting up. A small voice in his head whispered, "Maybe you should call it a night." But the calculator in his mind immediately dismissed it. Rent wouldn't wait. Groceries wouldn't wait. His daughter's school lunch money wouldn't wait. He swallowed his fear and accepted the order. As he drove, he passed houses that looked dark and quiet, the kind of quiet that made the storm feel even louder. Trees bent under the wind, branches scraping against fences. A flash of lightning made him blink, and the thunder that followed shook the car. His knuckles turned white on the steering wheel, but he kept going. He knew how important it was to finish the night, even if every part of him wanted to stop. Memories of past storms flickered in his mind. Times when the power went out, and he had to keep his daughter calm. Nights when the snow piled up, and he still had to make it to work. He had learned to endure, to push through fear and exhaustion, because the world didn't pause for anyone's struggles. That same determination kept him moving now, even as the rain turned streets into slick mirrors, reflecting the flashing lights and distorted shadows. When he finally reached the neighborhood for this particular delivery, the storm was at its worst. Water pooled in the streets, making small waves as cars splashed by. He parked the car carefully, not daring to slip. He grabbed the pizza bag, heavy with warmth, and stepped out into the rain. The first drops soaked through his jacket immediately, chilling him to the bone. The wind whipped his hair, and he had to bend slightly forward, almost like fighting against an invisible wall, just to reach the front door. The houses here were quiet. Most lights were off, curtains drawn. He imagined people inside, cozy and safe, unaware of the storm outside. Some nights, he wondered if he would ever feel that kind of security for himself and his daughter. But tonight, there was no time for that. One step at a time, he crossed the yard, soaked and tired, gripping the pizza bag tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping him going. Finally, he reached the house. He rang the doorbell and waited, shivering. Each second felt stretched, and the storm made the ringing echo strangely. He tapped his foot, trying to stay warm. Then a door opened, and a woman appeared. She was calm, almost serene, like the storm outside didn't exist for her. She held the door slightly closed, as if shielding herself from the rain, and looked at him with curiosity. He mumbled a greeting, his voice hoarse from the cold and the long day. She nodded politely, stepping back to take the pizza. But then she paused, studying him with a kind of quiet attention that made him shift uncomfortably. He was used to being ignored, used to people seeing him only as the delivery guy. This was different. There was something gentle, almost human, in the way she looked at him. It caught him off guard. A small talk started, the usual lines about the storm and the pizza. But then, unexpectedly, she asked a simple question, and it hit him like lightning. "Are you single?" She asked, her voice calm but curious. He froze. He hadn't expected that. After a long day of rushing, driving, worrying, and barely surviving, no one had ever asked him that. Not in a polite, gentle way. Not with interest that wasn't about money or work. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. The words felt heavy, loaded with the weight of his life. Single, yes, always single. Always struggling. Always carrying more than he wanted anyone to know. But he nodded, muttering something almost inaudible, unsure how to explain the life behind those two words. She smiled, a kind, understanding smile, and it felt strangely comforting in the middle of the storm. She stepped back to let him breathe, to let him be himself for a moment, without judgment. That small gesture, simple as it was, felt like a lifeline. He realized he hadn't felt that kind of ease in years. People often assumed he was tough, or busy, or not worth the attention. But here, in the middle of rain and wind, someone had paused and looked at him, really looked. It was a strange, new feeling, and it made him uncomfortable and grateful, all at once. As she took the pizza and gave him the payment. She added a little extra, almost like a tip, but not really. It was more than that. It was acknowledgement, recognition of all the effort he had put in, of all the nights spent struggling. He thanked her, his voice stronger now, despite the cold and the fatigue. There was a spark of connection, subtle but undeniable, the kind that didn't need grand gestures or dramatic words. Before he left, she said something else, almost casually, almost shyly. She wondered aloud if he might like to come by sometime, not for work, not for a tip, but just to talk. He blinked at her, caught off guard. It was not what he expected from a stormy night delivery. It was human. It was real. And for someone like him, someone who had spent years focused only on survival, it was startling and strange and hopeful. He nodded, not knowing what else to say. The rain was still pouring, the wind still harsh, but now he felt a little lighter. Something had shifted, something small but important. He returned to his car, careful on the slick streets, and as he drove away, he thought about her calm voice, her smile, and that simple question that had caught him off guard. "Are you single?" The night seemed different now, even though the storm raged on. Each delivery that remained didn't feel like just another chore. There was a small, quiet energy inside him, a glimmer of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Possibility. Maybe life wasn't just about surviving anymore. Maybe, just maybe, there were moments that could change everything. Even if the world outside still raged with wind and rain. By the time he finished his deliveries, his clothes soaked and his body tired, he felt a strange mix of exhaustion and hope. The storm had left puddles on the streets, reflections of neon signs and streetlights, distorted and flickering. He drove through them slowly, careful not to skid, but also aware that he was carrying something new with him, a memory, a connection, a moment that refused to fade even in the darkness. When he finally reached home, he felt the relief of the familiar apartment, the warm smell of leftover dinner, and the soft sound of his daughter asleep. He tucked himself in quietly, feeling the ache in his body and the quiet thrill of the unexpected encounter. The storm outside didn't seem so threatening anymore. He realized, as he lay there staring at the ceiling, that life sometimes delivered surprises in the middle of ordinary nights, even during storms. Sometimes the smallest gestures, the gentlest questions, or the kindest smiles could break through years of struggle, if only for a moment. And tonight, in the rain and wind, that had happened. He closed his eyes, exhausted but alert, knowing that tomorrow would be just as hard, just as relentless. But for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to imagine that maybe, one day, there could be more than just survival. Maybe there could be connection, and maybe there could be hope. Even on the stormiest nights, the storm had not let up when he left that house. Rain continued to fall in sheets, making the streets shine like liquid glass under the streetlights. He drove slowly, wipers working as fast as they could, but the wind and water made it almost impossible to see far ahead. Every delivery felt heavier now, not because of the weight of the pizzas, but because of the memory of that small moment at the door. He couldn't shake it, and that made the night feel longer, colder, and yet strangely alive. The next address was a few streets over, but the storm turned every turn into a challenge. Puddles covered potholes, and each bump made his car jolt. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, and forced himself to breathe calmly. His mind kept drifting back to the woman's face. Her calm presence, even in the chaos of the storm, replayed in his thoughts. She had asked a question, so simple and ordinary, but it had cracked something open inside him. "Are you single?" She had asked it not out of judgment, but out of curiosity, as if she wanted to understand him. When he parked at the next house, his jacket clung to him, soaked through, and his shoes squished with every step. He carried the pizza bag like it was a lifeline. The streets were nearly empty. Most people had already decided to stay inside, safe from the storm. The wind pushed against him as he walked, but he had learned to move through obstacles in life. And he moved now, step by careful step, at this house. He rang the doorbell, and a small boy opened it, shy and wide-eyed, wearing pajamas and holding a toy. He smiled at the boy and handed over the pizza, exchanging a few kind words with the mother, who was grateful for the late delivery. But he found himself distracted, his mind still on the encounter earlier. The way she had looked at him, the way she had spoken, it was unlike anything he had experienced in years. People had always seen him as tired, worn, invisible. But she had seen him, and that small recognition had an impact he hadn't expected. The drive to the next delivery felt different. The rain continued, but the weight on his shoulders felt slightly lighter. A tiny spark had been lit, and he didn't want to let it fade. He thought about how strange it was that life could hand him moments like this in the middle of chaos, in the middle of exhaustion, in the middle of a storm. He usually focused only on what needed to be done, on what could keep his daughter fed and safe, on what would keep him afloat. But this night reminded him that life was not just about survival. As he navigated the winding streets, his mind wandered to his daughter. She had been asleep when he left for the deliveries, and he imagined her cozy under her blanket, her small hands curled up near her face. He pictured her smiling in the morning, chattering about school, and he felt a familiar tug of longing. He wished he could shield her from the struggles he faced, from the exhaustion, from the constant weight of responsibility. And yet, he knew he could not. All he could do was keep going, keep trying, and keep hoping that his efforts would give her a better life. At the next stop, he delivered a large order to a family celebrating a small birthday party. The children ran around, squealing with delight, and he offered a polite smile. It struck him how different life could look from house to house, family to family. He sometimes felt like an observer, moving between worlds that were safer, warmer, more complete than his own. But he also knew that his struggles had shaped him into someone who noticed details, who appreciated small kindnesses, who valued the rare moments of genuine connection. The storm continued to pound on, relentless, and he began to feel the first sharp sting of fatigue. His shoulders ached, and his back felt tight from hours of sitting and carrying heavy bags. He reminded himself that the end was near, that soon he would finish the last delivery and head home. Yet every delivery felt heavier than the last, not just physically, but emotionally. He had given so much of himself all day, and the storm outside mirrored the storm inside Dot when he approached the final delivery on his route. The rain was a thick curtain. He squinted through the windshield, spotting the familiar house almost instinctively. Something about it called to him, pulled at him in a way he didn't fully understand. He parked, grabbed the pizza, and stepped into the storm once again, shivering as the wind whipped against him. Every drop of rain soaked him instantly, running down his face, mixing with the sweat and grime of the day. He kept walking, focused only on the door ahead, though his thoughts kept returning to her calm expression and the unusual warmth she had shown him. He rang the doorbell, and it opened. She stood there, holding the door just enough to let him see her, and he noticed a faint smile playing on her lips. The warmth of the house behind her contrasted sharply with the cold and wet world outside. He mumbled a greeting, trying not to shiver too noticeably. She stepped aside, letting him come closer, and for a moment, the storm felt a little less oppressive. They talked briefly about the weather, the kind of small talk that somehow felt comforting in its simplicity. But then she said something unexpected, something that made him pause. "You must be tired," she said softly. "Do you want to come in for a minute, just to dry off?" He blinked. He hadn't anticipated this. Normally, he would have handed over the food and left without a second thought. But now, standing in front of her, soaked and weary, he realized he didn't have to. She was offering something rare, a moment of care, a moment of human connection without expectation. He nodded, almost reluctantly, stepping inside. The warmth hit him instantly, a sharp contrast to the cold rain, and he took a moment to breathe. She handed him a towel, and he began drying off, feeling the wetness leave his clothes, and strangely, some of the tension from his day. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to relax just a little. He noticed the small details of the home, a picture of a pet on the wall, a cozy throw on the couch, books stacked neatly on a shelf. It was ordinary, comfortable, lived in, and it made him feel calm. They talked more, cautiously at first, sharing pieces of their lives in small, careful ways. He spoke a little about his daughter, about the challenges of raising her. Alone, about the exhaustion of balancing 2 jobs. She listened without judgment, nodding, asking questions that showed she truly cared. For a man used to being invisible, used to being reduced to the work he did and the responsibilities he carried, it was a revelation. She saw him not just as a delivery guy, not just as a single parent, but as a human being with struggles and stories and hopes. He realized that he hadn't had a conversation like this in years. Most people only asked questions out of politeness or curiosity, but her questions felt genuine, thoughtful. There was no hidden agenda, no judgment, no rush. It was just 2 people, talking, connecting, and somehow, in the middle of a stormy night, it felt like something meaningful was happening. The storm outside continued, but the sound of rain against the windows became almost soothing. He laughed quietly at a story she told, and she smiled at him in a way that made the weight he carried feel lighter, if only for a moment. He realized how much he had missed moments like this simple human connection. Kindness, understanding. It had been years since someone had looked at him this way. Years since he felt like more than just a man struggling to survive. Eventually, it was time to leave. The pizzas were delivered, the exchange complete, and he felt the familiar tug of duty pulling him back to reality. But before he stepped out into the storm again, she said something quietly, almost shyly. She asked if he would like to come by sometime, not for work, not for another delivery, but just to talk. He paused, considering the offer. The idea of vulnerability, of opening up in this way, was foreign to him. But there was something about her, about this unexpected moment in the middle of a storm, that made him nod Dot as he walked back to his car, soaked once again. He felt an unfamiliar sense of hope mingled with exhaustion. The storm had not changed. The streets were still slick, and the night was still dark. But something inside him had shifted. He had been seen. He had been acknowledged. And for a man who had spent years carrying the world on his shoulders, that was a gift more valuable than any tip, more valuable than any order completed. Driving home, he thought about the tiny spark that had ignited in that house. He thought about the way she had smiled, the way she had listened, the simple question that had started it all. "Are you single?" It seemed small, almost trivial, but it had opened the door to something entirely new. And as he navigated the rainy streets, careful not to skid or crash, he realized that sometimes life delivered moments that were bigger than the challenges surrounding them, moments that reminded him that even in the hardest nights, there could be warmth, connection, and a hint of something more. Dot by the time he reached home. His body ached from hours of driving, carrying and fighting against the storm, but his heart felt strangely lighter. The rain had not stopped, but the storm had changed for him. He went inside, quietly checking on his daughter, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to think about the future, not just the next bill, not just the next meal, but the possibility of connection, of kindness, of human moments that mattered. He lay in bed that night, soaked clothes finally replaced with warmth, and thought about the encounter over and over. The storm outside mirrored the storms he faced in life, relentless and challenging. But the encounter in that small house had reminded him that even in the darkest nights, there could be light, there could be warmth, and there could be moments that made everything worthwhile. And as he drifted to sleep, he realized that this night, this storm, had given him something rare. Hope. He woke up the next morning to the soft sound of rain tapping against the window. The storm from the night before had not fully passed, leaving the streets wet and slick. Even so, there was a strange calm in the air, a quiet reminder that yesterday had ended, and today offered another chance. He got out of bed carefully, mindful of not waking his daughter, and moved through the small apartment with practiced ease. Breakfast needed to be made, lunches packed, the usual rush of morning life, but his mind kept wandering back to the house in the storm, to the way she had smiled, the way she had listened, and the way she had asked him a question that felt simple yet profound. "Are you single?" He tried to shake it off at first, telling himself he couldn't dwell on it. He had responsibilities, bills, work, a child who depended on him. But the thought lingered, stubborn and persistent, like a melody that refused to fade. He realized that for the first time in a long while, he felt something more than fatigue or worry. There was curiosity, and maybe even the faintest spark of hope. After walking his daughter to school, he went to his day job, but the storm's remnants followed him everywhere. Rain still fell in soft showers, and the roads were slick. Normally, he would have thrown himself entirely into work, using the tasks to push everything else out of his mind. But today, his thoughts drifted constantly. He found himself imagining her sitting in her living room, warm and dry, perhaps making tea, perhaps just reading quietly. He imagined conversations that could happen, questions she might ask, and the quiet moments that might follow. At lunch, he sat alone as usual, his food untouched for a while, as he considered what had happened the night before. He realized he hadn't just been delivering pizzas in a storm. He had been given a glimpse of something rare, genuine connection, without expectation, without judgment, without the pressures that life constantly demanded from him. He wasn't sure what to do with it. He wasn't even sure he had the right to hope for more. But the feeling lingered like sunlight, breaking through clouds. By the time his day shift ended, the streets were still wet, the air thick with the smell of rain on asphalt. He felt the familiar pull of his second job, the pizza deliveries that kept the apartment running, kept food on the table, kept life moving forward. His body ached already, tired from the day's work, but he reminded himself that the end was near. Just a few more hours, a few more deliveries, and he could finally go home warm and exhausted, ready to collapse into bed. As he drove through the wet streets, he found himself rehearsing the conversation from the night before. Her calm voice, the gentle way she had asked him about his life, the small gesture of inviting him inside, he replayed it all in his mind. He had been careful not to read too much into it, not to let hope run wild, but he couldn't ignore the fact that her kindness had affected him in ways he hadn't expected. It was strange, unsettling, and yet comforting. When he reached the first delivery of the night, he moved through it almost automatically, greeting the customer politely, handing over the food, accepting the payment. The house felt ordinary, quiet, safe, nothing remarkable. And yet, every time he closed the door and stepped back into the stormy night, he felt the emptiness again. The spark from the previous night had shown him that connection was possible, that someone could look at him and see more than just a man struggling to survive. He didn't want to lose that feeling, even in the chaos of his work. Hours passed. Deliveries came and went, each one a small repetition of the last. He moved through neighborhoods he had passed countless times, streets that looked different in rain and darkness, houses that blurred together. Yet his mind kept returning to her. He wondered if she thought about him, if she remembered the way he had seemed tired, soaked, and almost too weary to smile. He wondered if she had noticed how much effort it took for him to carry on, even when he felt at his limits. Finally, he reached the last delivery of the night. It was the same house, the one that had changed the way he felt about the evening. He parked the car and grabbed the pizza bag, now lighter than usual in his hands, as if the anticipation gave him energy. He approached the front door cautiously, soaked and shivering, but with a strange sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. When she opened the door, he felt a jolt of recognition, as if the warmth of her home reached out to meet him in the storm. She looked at him, her expression calm, welcoming, and somehow patient, as if she had been expecting him. He smiled awkwardly, unsure how to greet someone who had already left such a strong impression on him. She smiled back, the kind of smile that didn't judge, didn't rush, didn't demand anything. It was simple, human, and completely unexpected. "Come in," she said gently. "You're soaked. You need to warm up." The offer made him hesitate. He wasn't used to being invited into someone's home. Not like this, not without reason. Normally, his work ended at the doorstep, and his life remained on the other side of the delivery. But tonight was different. The storm outside made the warmth inside feel irresistible, and he stepped forward, grateful for the simple gesture of care. She handed him a towel, and he began drying off, the wetness clinging stubbornly to his jacket and hair. The warmth of the room seeped into him slowly, easing the chill from the rain, but also easing the weight he carried on his shoulders. For a moment, he allowed himself to relax. He noticed the little details of the home, The soft hum of the heater, the faint scent of something baking, the neatly stacked books, the small pictures on the wall. It was ordinary, yet it felt profoundly comforting. They spoke quietly, cautiously, at first about the storm, the streets, the challenges of driving through such weather. But soon, the conversation shifted, naturally, to their lives. He shared small pieces of his story, carefully, selectively, about raising his daughter alone, about juggling jobs, about the exhaustion that never seemed to end. She listened without judgment, asking gentle questions that made him feel seen, not as a struggling single dad, but as a person, a human being with thoughts, feelings, and dreams. He realized how rare this moment was. Most of his interactions with people were transactional, necessary, polite, but shallow. Few people asked about him, about his life, about what mattered. And here was someone asking, listening, responding with genuine interest. It was almost overwhelming, but in a quiet, grounding way that made him feel alive, rather than exhausted. They shared small laughs over little stories. Stories that didn't matter to anyone else, but mattered to them in that moment. He noticed the ease in her movements, the way she didn't rush, didn't push, didn't try to impress. She was herself, quietly present, and that presence made him want to open up even more. He realized he had spent years protecting himself, hiding, keeping life at arm's length, and now he was letting someone in, carefully, cautiously, but willingly. Time passed almost unnoticed. The storm outside continued, but inside there was a small pocket of calm, of connection, of something that felt like understanding. He realized that the night, the storm, and the deliveries were no longer the main story. The real story was happening here, in this quiet room, between two people who had met by chance, yet somehow connected in ways that felt deliberate, meaningful, almost inevitable. Before he left, she handed him a small piece of paper, almost casually. On it was her number, a simple gesture, but heavy with possibility. She smiled and said softly, "Call me sometime." No rush, no pressure, just sometime. He nodded, unsure if he could speak, unsure if the words he wanted to say would come out right. The moment was fragile, precious, and he didn't want to break it with clumsy words. As he stepped back into the storm, the rain now felt different. It was still cold, still relentless, but it didn't feel as heavy. He walked back to his car, carrying the pizza bag lighter, almost unconsciously, as if the small connection had lifted some of the weight he carried for years. He started the engine, careful on the slick streets, but feeling a strange, buoyant energy he hadn't felt in a long time. Driving home, he thought about the night, the storm, and the woman who had seen him in ways no one else had. He thought about the possibility of something more, something human, something real. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of understanding that life could surprise him. That kindness could reach him even when he was at his limits. And that connection could come when he least expected it. When he finally reached his apartment, his body ached, soaked and tired, but his heart felt lighter. His daughter was asleep, curled up under her blanket, and he felt a wave of gratitude that he could still provide for her, still be there for her, even as he explored the tiny new possibility for himself. He tucked himself in, exhausted, but with a quiet smile, realizing that life had given him a gift in the middle of the storm, a reminder that human connection, even in small doses, could change everything. As he drifted to sleep, he reflected on the unusual night. The storm had not stopped, and challenges remained. Work would still be hard. Life would still be exhausting. But he had experienced a moment that reminded him he was not invisible. He was not alone. And for a man who spent years surviving, that was more valuable than he could have imagined. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. Not for grand things, not for miracles, but for something simple, human and real, a connection, a smile, a kind word, and the possibility that life could bring more moments like this. If only he stayed open enough to notice them. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening in the soft morning light. The air smelled fresh, like the world had been washed clean overnight. He woke up slowly, still feeling the weight of the previous night's deliveries on his body, but something inside him had shifted. He moved quietly around the apartment, careful not to wake his daughter, letting the warmth of the kitchen fill him as he prepared breakfast. As he packed her lunch and watched her eat, he found himself smiling more easily, his mind replaying the night before, and the small moments that had made it feel unlike any other. After walking her to school, he drove to his day job with a new kind of energy, subtle but unmistakable. The storm had left puddles on the streets, but the world looked brighter, more alive. He thought about her calm presence, the way she had truly listened, and the simple gesture of offering him warmth and human kindness. For years, he had been caught in survival mode, moving from one responsibility to the next, barely noticing anything beyond the immediate. But now, he carried a spark that made him notice details he had long ignored, the way the sun glinted on wet leaves, the faint scent of coffee from a cafe down the street, the soft laughter of children playing outside. During lunch, he sat alone, but instead of thinking about bills or deadlines, he thought about what had happened. He replayed the conversation, the moment she handed him her number, and the way the storm outside contrasted with the warmth inside her home. He realized that it wasn't just her kindness that affected him. It was a reminder that life could hold unexpected moments of connection, even in the midst of struggle. He felt a rare mix of gratitude and cautious hope. By the end of his day's shift, he felt the familiar pull of his evening job, but tonight was different. The deliveries were still a necessity, but he approached them with a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Every turn, every stop, every interaction felt slightly brighter, colored by the memory of the woman's calm presence and the unexpected warmth she had shown him. The storm was gone, but its impact remained a reminder that even in difficult times, life could surprise him. The first few deliveries were routine. He greeted customers, handed over pizzas, and collected payments, all while moving through neighborhoods familiar from countless nights behind the wheel. But his mind returned often to the house from the stormy night, imagining what it might be like to visit again under calmer conditions, to sit and talk without the urgency of weather pressing down on him. The thought made him nervous and excited in equal measure. It had been years since he felt this kind of anticipation, not for work, not for duty, but for human connection. When he reached the last delivery of the night, he recognized the address instantly. His heart beat a little faster, a reminder of the unusual way life had unfolded during the storm. He parked carefully, grabbed the pizza bag, and approached the door, conscious of the small flutter of hope inside him. She opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been expecting him, and smiled warmly. The memory of that first night's encounter made him pause, hesitant but eager. "Good evening," he said, his voice slightly hoarse from the long day. "Evening," she replied softly, stepping aside to let him in. "You're early tonight." He shrugged, a small smile on his face. "Just finished my deliveries. Thought I'd stop by." He hadn't planned anything beyond polite conversation, but her calm presence made it feel natural to stay a little longer. To talk, to connect. They sat together in her living room, the warm light and quiet hum of her home offering a stark contrast to the damp streets outside. He told her about his daughter, about the challenges of raising her alone, about the small victories that kept him going. She listened without interruption, nodding, asking gentle questions that made him feel understood. For the first time in years, He spoke freely without feeling judged, without worrying about how his struggles would be perceived. In return, she shared pieces of her own life-quiet anecdotes, small victories and everyday challenges. He listened carefully, realizing how rare it was to find someone willing to share without pretense, without expectation, without judgment. Their conversation flowed naturally, a rhythm that felt comfortable and grounding. For a man accustomed to transactional interactions, this was transformative. Time passed unnoticed. They laughed over small stories, shared observations about the world, and discussed dreams both big and small. He noticed the subtle details, the way she tilted her head when she laughed, the soft sincerity in her voice, the way her presence seemed to ease the tension in his shoulders. It was ordinary, yet extraordinary in its effect on him. For the first time in a long while, he felt not just seen, but valued. Eventually, she stood and offered him a cup of tea. He accepted, grateful for the simple comfort, and realized how small acts of kindness could leave lasting impressions. As he sipped the warm liquid, he felt a quiet sense of possibility. Life was hard, responsibilities were constant. But there were moments like this moments that reminded him that human connection could exist, even in the most unlikely circumstances. The conversation eventually turned to lighter topics. Share. Interests and commonalities he hadn't expected to find. They discovered mutual appreciation for simple pleasures, quiet walks, reading, music, and the comfort of a warm home. Each revelation made him feel more comfortable, more at ease, more willing to trust that something meaningful could develop from these small, shared moments. Before he left, she handed him another small note, her number again, with a gentle smile. "No pressure," she said. "Just in case you want to talk or meet up sometime." He nodded, feeling the weight of gratitude settle in his chest. "Thank you," he said softly. "I will." Stepping back into the evening, he felt the familiar exhaustion from work, but it was tempered by a new energy. The walk back to his car, usually tedious and uncomfortable, felt lighter, almost buoyant. The world around him, the quiet streets, the glistening puddles, the distant hum of traffic seemed different somehow, more alive, more filled with possibility. Driving home, he thought about the journey he had been on, about the years of struggle, about the endless responsibilities of raising a child alone, and about the small moments that could transform life unexpectedly. The storm had passed, but its impact had left a lasting impression, reminding him that even in difficult times, life could offer warmth, kindness, and the chance for connection. When he finally reached his apartment, he found his daughter asleep, curled up under her blanket. He smiled, feeling a wave of love and determination. All the hard work, all the exhaustion, all the long nights were for her, but tonight he realized there could also be room for himself, for moments of joy, connection, and hope. He tucked himself in quietly, letting the warmth of home and the memories of the evening wash over him. Over the next few weeks, small changes began to happen. He stayed in touch with her, exchanging messages, meeting occasionally for coffee or a walk. The interactions were simple, human, and genuine, allowing trust and understanding to grow naturally. Each meeting left him feeling lighter, more hopeful, and more willing to allow himself to imagine a life that included connection beyond survival. His daughter noticed a change too. He came home with a lighter step, a softer expression, more willingness to share small stories about his day. She asked questions, curious about his new friend, and he answered honestly, careful to maintain boundaries, but open enough to share the warmth he had found. Watching her respond with curiosity and delight made him feel that he was not only surviving, but beginning to thrive. Life's challenges did not vanish. Bills still needed to be paid, work remained exhausting, and responsibilities never ceased. But now, he carried something different, a sense of possibility, a reminder that human connection and kindness could exist even in the midst of struggle. The stormy night that had started it all became a touchstone, a memory of how small, unexpected moments could transform perspective and open doors to hope. Weeks turned into months. The bond between them grew steadily, rooted in respect, shared understanding, and simple, meaningful conversations. He discovered that life could be full of struggles and still offer moments of beauty, kindness, and genuine care. The woman had become more than a fleeting presence. She was a reminder that he was not alone, that connection was possible, and that hope could be found in the most unexpected places. One evening, after a long day of work and deliveries, he returned home to find his daughter waiting for him with a smile. Homework completed, and a small drawing she had made for him. He felt a swell of pride and love. Later, as he reflected on the day, he realized how much he had changed since that stormy night. He was still a hard-working, struggling single dad, but now he carried hope and connection alongside the weight of responsibility. Life felt fuller, richer, and more human. He often thought back to that night, the rain, the storm, the unexpected question, and realized it had been more than a chance encounter. It had been a turning point, a moment that reminded him that even in hardship, life could bring unexpected light, warmth, and connection. It had shown him that kindness and understanding could reach him even when he felt invisible, and that small gestures could create ripples that changed everything. As he tucked his daughter into bed that night, he felt a quiet sense of gratitude for the life he had, for the challenges that had shaped him, and for the small, human connections that reminded him he was not alone. He knew there would still be storms, still be hard nights, still be days that felt heavier than he could bear. But he also knew that he could face them with resilience, with hope, and with the quiet knowledge that life had a way of surprising him with warmth and connection, even in the most unlikely moments. He went to bed that night with a sense of peace, knowing that life could be hard, but that kindness, understanding, and connection could make it beautiful too. The storm had passed, but it had left behind a life lesson he would never forget. Even in struggle, there could be hope. Even in exhaustion, there could be joy. And even in a world that often felt harsh and unyielding, human connection could create warmth, light, and the promise of better days. And in that quiet, reflective moment, he realized that he was ready to embrace whatever came next, not just for survival, but for life itself.